The folder hit the boardroom table before Jasmine even finished her second sentence. Not a dramatic slam. Something worse. The quiet, controlled kind, the kind that says I have already decided you don't exist. 8 executives sat around that long polished table in the sole headquarters of Choi Technologies, and not one of them moved. They were dressed in dark suits and careful expressions, and they watched Choi Hyun-woo the way people watch a man who controls their salaries, which is to say, they watched him and not her. Jasmine Caldwell had been standing at the far end of the room for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes was apparently too long. Miss Caldwell. Hyun-woo's voice came out measured. Quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a room faster than shouting. You are an intern. She knew that. She had not forgotten that. But she had also spent 11 weeks inside this company's data infrastructure, and what she found there kept her awake at night in ways that had nothing to do with ambition and everything to do with mathematics. Yes, sir, she said. And I've been studying the company's global expansion architecture since my 3rd week here. There is a structural flaw in the data routing model that you were not invited to speak in this meeting. The air in the room changed. Not loudly, just a degree or 2 colder. Jasmine felt it on the back of her neck. She had felt that specific temperature before, in graduate school, in Chicago conference rooms, in every space where her presence required more justification than her work should have needed. She recognized the cold. She had learned not to flinch at it. She kept her eyes on Hyun-woo. He was younger than she expected when she first saw him, maybe 36, 37, with the kind of stillness that comes not from peace but from years of learning to perform control. He sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, and he looked at her the way someone looks at a door they are about to close. 3 seats to his left, a senior engineer named Park Sung-jin had gone completely still. He was holding a pen above his notepad, and Jasmine noticed, she noticed everything, that the pen had stopped moving the moment she pulled out her data projections. Park had not looked away from her numbers. Not once. She pressed forward. If the expansion continues on the current model, she said carefully, the network will begin collapsing under its own load within 22 to 26 months. I have the modeling data here. I've run it 6 different ways, and the result is consistent. But there is a solution, a full redesign of the routing architecture that would not only fix the flaw but increase scalability by. Enough! The word landed like a door closing. Hyun-woo stood slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You entered a restricted executive meeting without authorization, he said. You interrupted a formal board session. And you are presenting unsolicited analysis on systems you have no clearance to access. Jasmine's jaw tightened. I had clearance to the data labs. Everything I accessed was within my. You are fired. The room inhaled. Somewhere near the window, a chair scraped softly against the floor. One of the older executives adjusted his glasses without looking up. Park Sung-jin's pen finally touched the notepad, but he didn't write anything. He just stared at the blank paper. Security appeared at the door before Jasmine had time to process what had just happened. She processed it anyway. She was 34 years old. She had worked 2 jobs through college while her mother's medical bills stacked up on the kitchen counter. She had earned 2 degrees, won a fellowship that brought her to the other side of the world, and spent 11 weeks pouring herself into a company that did not know her name until this moment. She knew what humiliation felt like. She also knew what dignity felt like. And she had decided, a long time ago, which one she would carry out of a room when she had to choose. Jasmine reached down and closed her notebook, slowly, no performance in it. She tucked it under her arm, the notebook with everything inside it, every model, every calculation, every page of the solution she had built from scratch in a dark lab while the building slept. She looked at Hyun-woo one final time. You just fire the person who solved your problem, she said. Not angry, not pleading, just factual, the way you state something true. Then she walked toward the door. The security guard stepped aside. The executives watched her go. The room stayed silent as the door opened, and stayed silent as it closed, and stayed silent for several seconds after. The particular silence of a group of powerful people who all just watched something irreversible happen, and not one of them moved to stop it. At the head of the table, Hyun-woo sat back down. He reached for his folder. His hand paused, just briefly above the cover. Park Sung-jin was still staring at his blank notepad. What no one in that room knew yet, what even Jasmine had almost forgotten in the shock of the moment, was that before she came to this meeting, she had uploaded everything to the company's internal server. Every model, every calculation, every page of a solution. The file was sitting in the system right now. Quiet, unread, worth more than anyone in that room currently understood. 3 days later, an engineer would open it by accident, and nothing would ever be the same. If you've ever been the smartest person in the room and still been made to feel invisible, this channel is built for you. Subscribe, and don't miss what happens next.
Some stories go beyond the events themselves. They reveal the courage it takes to stand firm, to hold on to your dignity, and to insist on respect, even when others try to take it away. If you've ever faced a moment that challenged your courage, or refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside, then you're exactly where you belong. This channel shares stories about women who refuse to be broken, and about the people who eventually discover, sometimes too late, that integrity is something money can never buy. Welcome to Afro Korean Storytime.
3 months before that boardroom, Jasmine Caldwell stood on a sidewalk in Chicago in February and let the cold remind her she was still alive. She had just come from the hospital. Her mother had been gone for 14 months, but Jasmine still drove past the building sometimes. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the same reason she still set 2 coffee cups out some mornings before she caught herself. Grief didn't follow a schedule. It just appeared, the way weather does, without asking if you were ready. She stood there on the sidewalk until the cold moved from uncomfortable to painful, and then she walked the 6 blocks to the fellowship office and changed her life. The International Systems Fellowship had accepted her application 3 weeks earlier, but the confirmation meeting was today. A 12-month placement in Seoul, full compensation, access to one of the most sophisticated technology infrastructures in Asia. Her professor, Dr. Elaine Marsh, had written the recommendation letter personally. Jasmine Caldwell is the most analytically precise systems strategist I have taught in 22 years, she had written. She does not theorize beautifully. She solves. Jasmine had read that letter once, in the parking lot of the fellowship office, and then folded it into the back of her notebook where she kept things she needed but didn't want to look at too often. She was not naive about what was waiting for her in Seoul. She had done the research. She understood Korean corporate culture, the hierarchy, the formality, the way seniority structured everything from who spoke first to who entered a room first to whose ideas were considered worth hearing. She was going as a foreigner, as a black woman, as an intern, regardless of her age or her credentials. She had been an outsider in rooms before. She knew how to work in spaces that weren't built for her. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't have prepared for, was Choi Hyun-woo. 12,000 kilometers away, in a corner office on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in Seoul, Hyun-woo was sitting across from his father and doing what he had been doing in that chair since he was old enough to understand what the name above the building meant. He was listening. His father, Choi Byung-soo, 71 years old, iron-backed, impossible to impress, sat behind a desk that was older than the company's current headquarters and spoke without looking up from the document in front of him. The board expects a major innovation announcement before the end of the fiscal year, his father said. Something that demonstrates global vision, not incremental progress, not efficiency reports. Something that changes the conversation about where this company is going. I understand, Hyun-woo said. Do you? His father looked up then, eyes like a man who had built something from nothing and was still not certain the person sitting across from him was capable of protecting it. Because understanding and delivering are different things. Hyun-woo held his father's gaze. He had learned, very early, that flinching was more costly than silence. I'll deliver, he said. His father studied him for a moment longer than was comfortable, then looked back at the document. See that you do. Hyun-woo drove home that evening through Seoul's winter streets and sat in his apartment with a glass of water he didn't drink and thought about the shape of an idea he didn't yet have. His chief engineer had assured him the expansion model was solid. The board's analysts had signed off. 3 external consultants had reviewed the infrastructure. Everyone said it was fine. So why, in the quiet of his own apartment, did something keep pulling at the edge of his certainty like a thread on a sleeve? He pushed it down. He was 3 weeks away from the biggest board presentation of his career. He didn't have room for doubt. He didn't know that the thing pulling at his certainty had just accepted a fellowship placement and was currently packing a suitcase in Chicago. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know that the idea he was desperately searching for was already built, already living inside a notebook he had never seen, in handwriting he didn't recognize. But he would. In 11 weeks, he would know exactly who she was. And in 14 weeks, he would do the one thing he would spend the rest of his life wishing he could undo. Soul smelled like something Jasmine didn't have a word for yet. Not bad, just specific. The way every city has a particular quality of air that belongs only to it. Something in the mix of food and traffic and seasons that tells your body you are somewhere that doesn't know you. She stepped out of the taxi on her first morning and stood in front of Choi Technologies headquarters and let the building look at her before she looked at it. 47 floors of glass and steel, with the company name in Korean characters across the front in letters large enough to be read from the river. The lobby doors were spotless. The security desk was manned by 2 men in identical dark uniforms who watched her walk in with the kind of careful neutrality that meant they were deciding something. She smiled, bowed slightly, presented her credentials in the correct order. They waved her through. She had done her homework. The first 2 weeks were a study in observation. Jasmine moved through the company quietly, learning the culture the way she had learned every new environment, by watching before speaking, and listening twice as long as she talked. She noticed the way junior employees stepped aside in the hallway when a senior manager approached. The precise angle of the bows, shallower between equals, deeper when the hierarchy required it. The way silence functioned differently here than in Chicago, where silence usually meant discomfort. Here it could mean respect. She adapted, not because she was performing deference, but because she genuinely respected the culture. She wasn't here to import herself into a space and demand it rearrange around her. She was here to understand it well enough to work inside it. But she also noticed the other things. The pause in conversations when she walked in. The fractional widening of eyes in the elevator before professional composure snapped back into place. The whisper she caught one afternoon near the break room, not malicious exactly, just honest in the way that careless observations often are. A black intern. That's unusual here, isn't it? She let it pass, not because it didn't register, but because she had a finite amount of energy and she had already decided what it was for. By her 3rd week, she was spending evenings in the data lab. The lab was on the 14th floor, a long, climate-controlled room full of servers and monitors and the low, steady hum of systems processing information that most people in the company would never look at closely enough to understand. Jasmine looked closely. That was her gift, and had always been, the ability to sit with a system long enough that its logic revealed itself, the way a foreign language starts to carry meaning after enough immersion. What the system revealed to her made her stomach tighten. The global expansion model was elegant on its surface. Any standard review would pass it, but 3 layers down, embedded in the load distribution architecture, was a flaw so fundamental it was almost invisible, the kind of error that doesn't announce itself at normal scale but becomes catastrophic once the network reaches full global load. Like a hairline fracture in a bridge that holds for years until the weight is finally too much. She ran the numbers. Then she ran them again with different assumptions. Then she built a 3rd model assuming best-case scenario for every variable the original engineers had flagged as uncertain. Even best case, the system collapsed. 18 months, maybe 26, if they were lucky with the rollout timeline. Jasmine sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. She thought about what it would mean for a company this size to have its global network fail publicly. The financial damage, the reputational damage. Thousands of enterprise clients whose operations ran on this infrastructure. Then she opened a new document and started building a solution. She called it the Meridian Framework, just in her own notebook, just for herself. A self-correcting adaptive network that rerouted load automatically based on real-time pressure mapping, eliminating the static distribution points that created the original vulnerability. Simple in concept, radical in application. The kind of solution that seemed obvious the moment you saw it and completely invisible until someone thought of it. She worked on it for 6 weeks. She barely noticed the nights blurring together. She did not notice, on one particular Tuesday evening, that the floor's overhead lights had switched to their energy-saving dim or that the elevator across the hall had opened, or that a man in a charcoal suit had stepped out and stopped at the lab window. She did not notice him standing there, studying the models on her screen. She had fallen asleep at her desk by then. 3 empty coffee cups beside her keyboard, her notebook open to a page dense with her own handwriting, and on the screen above her, a structural solution worth more than anything currently sitting in the company's pipeline. The man in the charcoal suit stood at the window for longer than he intended to. Then he turned to his assistant. "Who is that?" The assistant checked her phone. "The intern, sir. Jasmine Caldwell." He looked at the screen once more. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite recognition, not quite curiosity. Something with no name yet. Then he walked away. He would remember this moment later. He would return to it the way you return to the last place you saw something before it disappeared, understanding, too late, that you should have stopped. Strong women recognize strong women. If stories like this speak to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Hyunwoo did not go back to the data lab. He told himself it was because he had more pressing priorities. The board presentation was in 3 weeks. His chief engineer had scheduled 2 additional review sessions for the expansion model. His father had called twice in 4 days, which meant the invisible clock in the room was getting louder. There were real things demanding his attention. He did not return to the lab, but he also did not stop thinking about what he had seen on that screen. He told himself it was a concern about data security. An intern working at that level of architecture without supervision was a procedural issue, nothing more. He mentioned it to his assistant, who flagged it to HR, who noted it in the system, and did nothing further because technically Jasmine Caldwell's fellowship access included the data lab. Everything was within protocol. Hyunwoo filed it away. 3 days later, Park Sung-jin came to his office. Park was 44, soft-spoken, and the kind of engineer who was more valuable than his title suggested. He had been with the company for 16 years. He understood the infrastructure the way a doctor understands the body, not just what was working, but the subtle signals of what wasn't. Hyunwoo trusted his judgment more than almost anyone else on the technical side. "I want to show you something," Park said. He placed a single printed page on the desk. It was a data summary, 2 columns comparing network load projections under the current expansion model against a modified architecture. The numbers in the second column were significantly better. The failure threshold in the second column barely registered as a concern. Hyunwoo studied the page. "Where did this come from?" Park hesitated. Just a beat. The hesitation of a man choosing his words carefully. "One of the interns has been running parallel models in the data lab," he said. "I reviewed her access logs last week. She's been there almost every night for 2 months." Hyunwoo looked up. "Caldwell," he said. Park nodded. "She's identified something in the load distribution architecture. I can't dismiss it, Hyunwoo. I've run her numbers twice. They hold." Silence sat between them. Hyunwoo looked at the page again. The numbers held. He could see that even without running them himself. That wasn't what was making his jaw tight. "Why hasn't she submitted this through the proper review channel?" he asked. "She did," Park said quietly. 3 times. Through her supervisor. The submissions were logged and deprioritized. "I don't think anyone above the 3rd floor has seen them." Hyunwoo set the paper down. He knew what Park was not saying directly, that the submissions from an intern, especially this particular intern, had been filtered out before they reached anyone with the authority to act on them. Not through malice, necessarily, just through the natural gravity of hierarchy, which tends to make things fall down rather than rise. "She has a solution," Park continued. "A full redesign proposal. I haven't seen the complete document, but from what she's shown in the lab work, she shouldn't have accessed those system layers," Hyunwoo said. Park was quiet for a moment. "Her clearance covered it," he said finally. Another silence. Hyunwoo stood and walked to his window. 40 floors below, Seoul moved in its ordinary way. Traffic, pedestrians, the river catching the afternoon light. He thought about his father's voice. Something that changes the conversation. He thought about the board meeting in 2 weeks. He thought about an intern he had seen asleep in a dark lab with 3 empty coffee cups and a screen full of work no one had asked her to do. "Set up a proper review," he said. "Senior engineering team. Full evaluation. If there's a real structural problem, I wanted assessed through official channels. Park nodded slowly. And the intern? Handle it through protocol, Hyunwoo said. If her findings have merit, they'll be incorporated through the appropriate process. Park stood. He picked up the paper from the desk and paused at the door. Hyunwoo, he said, then stopped. What? Park looked at him for a moment. Nothing, he said. I'll schedule the review. He left. Hyunwoo stood at the window for a long time after. The review was scheduled for the following week. It was quietly delayed by his chief engineer, who assured him the current model had already been validated by 3 external consultants, and that introducing intern-level analysis into the official pipeline would create unnecessary noise before the board presentation. Hyunwoo agreed to the delay. He would replay that decision for the rest of the year. Because while he stood at that window talking himself into the comfortable version of events, Jasmine Caldwell was on the 14th floor finishing the last section of the Meridian framework and making her own quiet, irreversible decision. She had tried the proper channels 3 times. Now she was going to try the only channel she had left. The morning of the board meeting, Jasmine woke at 4:30 and sat at the edge of her bed in the dark. She had not slept well. Not because she was afraid, or not only because of that, but because she had spent most of the night making sure she was certain. She ran through the decision the way she ran through her models, methodically, testing every assumption, looking for the place where the logic broke down. It didn't break down. She had submitted through her supervisor. Twice. The third submission, she had sent directly to the Senior Engineering Review queue, which Park Sung-jin had told her quietly in the elevator one morning was the appropriate escalation path. That had been 8 days ago. She had heard nothing. The board meeting was this morning. After today, the company would formally commit to the full global expansion timeline. Resources would be allocated, contracts would be signed, and the flawed architecture would be locked into a 2-year rollout from which reversing course would cost more than correcting it now. Jasmine got up and made coffee. She opened her notebook and read through the Meridian framework one final time. Not because she doubted it, because she needed to walk into that room carrying the full weight of what she knew, and she needed that weight to feel real and not terrifying. It was both. She dressed carefully. Dark blazer, pressed slacks, the kind of outfit that said I belong in this room without asking permission to say it. She took the elevator to the 32nd floor at 8:45. The boardroom had a glass wall facing the hallway. Through it, she could see the executives filing in. 8 of them, plus Hyunwoo at the head of the table, plus 2 of his father's oldest board allies, men who had been with the company since its founding and who Jasmine had been told, in careful whispers, carried more actual authority than their official titles suggested. She pushed the door open and walked in. 7 heads turned. Hyunwoo looked up from his folder. His expression shifted, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, in a way that Jasmine read not as anger but as something more complicated, something between recognition and alarm. Miss Caldwell, he said. I apologize for the interruption, she said. She did not sit. I've been attempting to reach the senior review team for 3 weeks. I understand the timing isn't ideal, but the expansion model has a structural flaw that will cause full network failure within 2 years, and this meeting is the last point at which correcting it is financially practical. No one spoke. Park Sung-jin, seated 3 chairs from Hyunwoo, had gone completely still. His pen hovered above his notepad. Jasmine reached into her folder and placed her data summary on the table, copies, 1 for each person present. She had printed them that morning. The flaw is in the load distribution architecture, she continued, her voice steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed not for performance but for survival. I've modeled it 6 ways. The failure threshold is consistent regardless of rollout timeline. But the Meridian framework, a full adaptive network redesign, corrects the vulnerability and increases scalability by a projected 43%. One of the older board members picked up the summary page. Park Sung-jin looked at his copy. His pen touched the paper. Still not writing, just resting there like he was trying to decide something. Hyunwoo was looking at Jasmine. She looked back. She watched him calculate. She had seen that look before, in different faces, in different rooms, the look of a person weighing what is true against what is convenient, and feeling the distance between them. His father's ally at the far end of the table had not touched the summary page. He was watching Hyunwoo. That was the moment. That was the exact moment when everything that followed became inevitable. Hyunwoo closed his folder. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "Quiet. Final. You entered this meeting without authorization. You accessed system architecture outside your designated role. And you have disrupted a formal board session. The data is not the issue," he said. He stood. "For breach of protocol," he said. "You are terminated, effective immediately." Somewhere in the room, a chair shifted. One of the executives, near the window, looked down at the table. Park Sung-jin's pen went still. Jasmine stood exactly as she was. She had planned for this possibility. She had hoped it wouldn't happen, but she had planned for it, because she was a woman who understood that hoping for the best and preparing for the worst were not opposites. She reached out and collected the data summaries from the table. Slowly, calmly, all except the one, in the hands of the older board member who had picked us up. He held on to it. She closed her folder. She looked at Hyunwoo. "You just fired the person who solved your problem," she said. The room held its breath. Then she walked out. The door closed behind her. In the hallway, the glass wall reflected her back at herself. A woman in a dark blazer, folder under her arm, walking at a pace that did not hurry and did not waver. Inside the boardroom, no one spoke for almost 30 seconds. Park Sung-jin finally looked up from the table. He looked at Hyunwoo. He said nothing. He didn't have to. That night, Jasmine uploaded the complete Meridian framework to the company's internal server and booked a flight to Chicago. She didn't know, as she sat in her apartment with her suitcase open on the bed, that the older board member was still holding her data summary, still reading it. She didn't know that Park Sung-jin had already sent a message to 2 of his most trusted engineers that said only, "Check the intern's access logs." All of them. She was just packing. Going home. Done. Or so she thought. Chicago in March felt like an apology the city wasn't quite ready to mean. The snow had mostly melted but hadn't fully surrendered. It hung around in gray piles at the edges of parking lots, stubborn and ugly. The lake was steel-colored. The wind off it had teeth. Jasmine stood outside her apartment building with her suitcase for a moment before going in. She had told herself, on the 14-hour flight home, that she would give herself exactly one day. One day to feel whatever needed to be felt. And then she would move. She gave herself 2. The first day, she didn't leave the apartment. She made soup from scratch because her mother had taught her that cooking was a form of thinking, that working with your hands freed the part of your brain that actually solved things. She made her mother's recipe, the one with the smoked turkey neck and the dark broth that took 4 hours to develop properly. She stood at the stove and watched it and didn't think about the boardroom or Hyunwoo or the folder or the way Park Sung-jin had looked at the table. She thought about her mother. She thought about what her mother would say, specifically. Not comfort exactly. Her mother was not a woman who confused comfort with truth. She would say something practical. She would say, "You already built the thing, baby. Nobody can unfire that out of existence." By the second morning, the grief had moved, not gone but shifted. From the front of her chest to the back of it. She had learned the geography of grief a long time ago. You didn't get to remove it. You just learned where it lived. She opened her notebook. She read through the Meridian framework from the beginning. And something happened that she hadn't expected. Reading it fresh, with the distance of Seoul and the flight and the 2 quiet days, she saw it more clearly than she had in the lab. Saw not just what it solved, but what it could become. The core architecture was broader than a fix for Choi Technologies. It was broader than any single company's infrastructure problem. It was a platform. She sat with that thought for a long time. Then she called her friend Maya. Maya Rhodes had been Jasmine's closest friend since graduate school, a sharp, direct woman who ran a small tech consulting firm in the South Side and had the particular gift of listening to half a sentence and understanding the full paragraph. They met at a coffee shop on 53rd Street, and Jasmine told her everything. Not the version where she minimized it. The real version. Maya listened without interrupting, which was how Jasmine knew it was serious. Maya always interrupted. When Jasmine finished, Maya wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and was quiet for a moment. "He fired you in front of the whole board," she said. "Yes. And your work is still in their system." "Yes." Maya nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I think. I think you came home early. She looked at Jasmine steadily. I think you're not done. Jasmine looked out the window at the gray Chicago street. The framework isn't just a patch for their system, she said. It's a full adaptive architecture. It could be licensed, built into a product, applied at scale across multiple industries. I know, Maya said. You've known that since you built it. You just needed to stop working for someone else before you could see it clearly. That night, Jasmine sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote 2 words at the top of the first page. Caldwell Systems. She wrote underneath it for 3 hours without stopping. Not a business plan exactly. More like the first honest conversation she had ever had with herself about what she actually wanted to build and why. By midnight, she had the outline. By the following week, she had a meeting with a small innovation hub in Bronzeville that had a residency program for early-stage tech founders. By the end of March, she had a desk, a second-hand monitor, and 2 people willing to work with her for deferred compensation while she filed the incorporation paperwork. She did not check the news from Seoul. She did not read industry publications. She did not wait. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known from her desk in that Bronzeville Innovation Hub, was that on the other side of the world, a file was sitting in a company's internal server and slowly becoming the most talked-about document in the building. She didn't know that 3 engineers had now read it and that one of them had printed it and carried it upstairs. She didn't know that Park Sung-jin had just knocked on the CEO's office door. And she didn't know that the man who fired her was about to discover the cost of what he had done. Not in abstract terms. In numbers. Specific, undeniable, billion-dollar numbers. If you've ever walked away from something that didn't value you, and then built something better, this channel is for you. Subscribe. We're just getting started. The file had no dramatic title. It was named MF_draft_JC_V7.pdf, and it had been sitting in the company's internal review server for 21 days when an engineer named Kim Dae-young opened it by accident while searching for a different document. He almost closed it. He was looking for a budget attachment, and this was clearly something else. A technical proposal, dense with data, the kind of document that usually took him 10 minutes to skim and discard. He scrolled down to find the author's name so he could redirect it to the right department. He saw the name, Jasmine Caldwell. He remembered her, the intern who had been escorted out of the 32nd floor 3 weeks ago. The story had moved through the building the way stories do, quietly, in fragments, with each retelling adding a slightly different emphasis depending on who was telling it. Kim almost closed the file again. Instead, almost out of curiosity, he read the first page. Then the second. He stopped scrolling. He read the whole document from the beginning. When he finished, he sat very still for approximately 40 seconds. Then he forwarded the file to 2 colleagues with a message that said only, "Read this before you do anything else today." By noon, 6 engineers had read it. By 3 in the afternoon, Park Sung-jin had a printed copy on his desk and was on his second read-through. By 5 o'clock, he was outside Hyunwoo's office. Hyunwoo was in a call with the board's financial committee when his assistant appeared at the glass door and held up 3 fingers. Their signal for this can't wait. He wrapped up the call, and Park came in before the door had fully opened. He placed the printed document on the desk. Hyunwoo looked at it, looked at Park. "Sit down," he said. Park sat. Hyunwoo read. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the building's ventilation system and the occasional sound of a page turning. Park watched him. Hyunwoo's expression did not change dramatically. He was too trained for that. But his pace slowed on the 3rd section, the one with the full comparative modeling. He went back to page 2 and reread something, then continued. He finished the document and set it down on the desk and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. "What's the independent valuation?" he asked. "We ran it this morning," Park said. "Conservative estimate, accounting for licensing potential and infrastructure application across 3 primary industry sectors." He paused. 1.2 billion. Silence. "That's conservative," Hyunwoo said. "Yes." Hyunwoo turned to his window. The city was moving into evening, lights beginning to surface across Seoul's skyline. He sat with that number. $1.2 billion. Built from scratch by a woman working alone in his building's data lab, at night, without support or authorization or acknowledgement. built by someone who had tried to give it to him 3 times through proper channels and been quietly ignored each time. Built by someone he had fired in front of 8 executives because the alternative, listening to an intern in front of his father's board allies, had felt, in that moment, like a cost he couldn't afford. He turned back to the desk. "Her current location," he said. Park reached into his folder and placed a second sheet on the desk. "Chicago. She's incorporated a new company, Caldwell Systems. Registered 3 weeks ago. She has a workspace at an innovation hub in Bronzeville." He paused. "She's moving fast." Hyunwoo looked at the registration document. He looked at the name. Caldwell Systems. She wasn't waiting. Of course she wasn't. He opened his desk drawer. He took out a piece of paper and a pen. Not his computer, not his phone, just paper and pen, and he began to write. Park watched him for a moment. "Do you want me to?" "I'll handle it," Hyunwoo said quietly. "Close the door on your way out." Park stood. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "Hyunwoo," he said. Hyunwoo didn't look up from the page. "She didn't upload that file as leverage," Park said. "She uploaded it because she wanted the work to survive even if she didn't." He left. The door closed. Hyunwoo sat alone in his office with a pen in his hand and $1.2 billion worth of someone else's brilliance on his desk, and he wrote a letter he didn't know if he would ever have the courage to deliver. Outside, Seoul moved into full night, and in a Bronzeville innovation hub, 12,000 kilometers away, Jasmine Caldwell was still at her desk, building something the world had not seen yet, completely unaware that the man who had fired her was writing her name by hand on a piece of paper and trying, inadequately, to find words large enough to hold what he had done. He wouldn't find them, but he would get on the plane anyway, because some mistakes are too large to correct from a distance. And Choi Hyun-woo, for all his faults, had never been a man who stayed comfortable in his own wreckage. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the board had already met without him that morning, and the decision they had made would change everything before he ever reached Chicago. The board had met without him on a Tuesday. Hyunwoo found out on a Wednesday morning from his assistant, who placed a single printed memo on his desk with the careful expression of someone delivering news they didn't want to be associated with. He read it twice. The emergency session had been called by Director Kwon, his father's oldest ally, the man who had sat at the far end of the boardroom and held Jasmine's data summary without setting it down. The session had included 5 of the 8 board members. No agenda had been filed. No minutes had been formally recorded. But the outcome was clear enough in the memo's careful corporate language. The board was pursuing direct contact with Jasmine Caldwell. Without him, Hyunwoo set the memo down and looked at his window for a long time. They had gone around him. Not past him, around him, the way water moves around an obstacle without acknowledging it. These were men who had watched him grow up, men who had eaten at his father's table, men who, 3 weeks ago, had sat in that boardroom and said nothing when he fired her. Now they wanted her back, and they didn't want him in the room when they asked. He picked up his phone and called Director Kwon directly. Kwon answered on the second ring. "I read the memo," Hyunwoo said. "Good," Kwon said. No apology in his voice. No discomfort. Just the flat pragmatism of a man who had been doing business for 40 years and had long since stopped performing emotions he didn't feel. "Then you understand the situation. I understand that the board convened without notifying me. The board convened because the expansion deadline is in 6 weeks, and the only viable solution to the infrastructure problem is sitting in Chicago building a competing company." A pause. "You created this situation, Hyunwoo." The words landed cleanly. Hyunwoo didn't respond. "Your father has been briefed," Kwon continued. That sentence was the real blow. Not the board meeting. Not the memo. That sentence. "I see," Hyunwoo said. "We're sending a representative to Chicago next week to open preliminary discussions with Miss Caldwell about licensing the framework directly to the company. Standard acquisition approach." Another pause, this one slightly longer. "Unless you have a better idea." The call ended. Hyunwoo sat at his desk with the phone still in his hand. An acquisition approach, sent by men who had watched her be humiliated and done nothing, now arriving at her door with corporate language and a checkbook. No acknowledgement of what happened. No accountability. Just money, which was how powerful people usually tried to make inconvenient things disappear. He thought about the letter in his desk drawer. He thought about what Park had said. She didn't upload that file as leverage. She uploaded it because she wanted the work to survive. He opened the drawer, took out the letter. Read it again. It wasn't a good letter. It was honest, which wasn't the same thing. It said what he had done, and why he had done it, and how both of those things sat in him now. It didn't ask for anything. It didn't offer anything. It was just true. He folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. Then he booked a flight to Chicago, 48 hours before the board's representative was scheduled to land. He was not going to let the first voice she heard from this company be someone with a briefcase and no conscience. Whatever she decided after he spoke to her, that was her right. But she was going to hear from him first. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he booked that flight, was that Maya Rhodes had already warned Jasmine that morning that someone from Choi Technologies had made inquiries through a mutual contact in the Chicago tech community. Jasmine knew someone was coming. She just didn't know yet who. And she was already deciding, very carefully, exactly what she would and would not accept. She saw him through the glass before he came in. The Innovation Hub's front wall was floor-to-ceiling windows facing the street, and Jasmine happened to be standing at the whiteboard near the front of the main workspace when the car pulled up. A black car, unfamiliar plates, the kind of vehicle that looked careful about itself. She watched Hyunwoo step out. He was wearing a dark coat, no tie, carrying nothing. No briefcase, no folder. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the building with an expression she couldn't fully read from this distance, something between composure and something else that composure was working hard to cover. Jasmine set down her marker. Behind her, her small team was working, 2 developers at their desks, Maya on a call in the corner. The room smelled like coffee and dry erase markers, and the particular focused energy of people building something from scratch. She had built this in 11 weeks. She let herself feel that for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked to the door. The receptionist, a 23-year-old named Darius, who took his role seriously, was already calling back to her when she appeared in the hallway. She walked past him to the entrance. She opened the door before Hyunwoo reached it. They stood facing each other on the threshold, her inside, him out, the cold March air moving between them. He looked older than she remembered. Or not older exactly. Heavier. The way people look when they've been carrying something they're not built for. "Miss Caldwell," he said. His voice was the same, measured, but the authority that had lived inside it in soul was absent. What was left was just the voice. "Mr. Choi," she said. A beat. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. She studied him. She had planned for this moment, not emotionally but practically. She had decided what she would and would not agree to. She had talked it through with Maya, who had said with characteristic directness, "You don't owe him your time, but you might owe yourself the chance to say what you need to say." "Come in," Jasmine said. She let him pass the main workspace. She felt her team notice, felt the room shift slightly in the way rooms do when someone unfamiliar enters, and the people inside do the quick, quiet calculation of who this person is and whether his presence changes anything. Maya looked up from her call. Her eyes moved from Hyunwoo to Jasmine. Jasmine gave her nothing. Maya went back to her call. They sat in the small conference room at the back. 2 chairs, a table, a window facing the alley. No formality to it. Nothing that looked like a negotiation. Hyunwoo sat with his hands folded on the table. He did not open with strategy. He did not open with numbers. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed an envelope on the table between them. "I wrote this before I knew whether you'd agree to see me," he said. Jasmine looked at the envelope. Her name was written on the front in Korean-inflected English handwriting, careful, deliberate letters. "You can read it later," he said. "Or not at all. That's not why I came." She left the envelope where it was. "Why did you come?" she said. He met her eyes. "Because the board is sending someone else in 2 days. And I couldn't let the first conversation you had with anyone from my company be a transaction." She was quiet. "I fired you because keeping order in that room felt more important than what you were saying," he said. "I knew your work had merit. Park had already told me. I had seen your screen myself, weeks before. I still fired you." He paused. "That is not a complicated mistake. It is a clear one. And it caused you real damage. Jasmine looked at him for a long time. There was no performance in him right now. She had become good at reading performance. It was a skill you developed when you spent years in rooms where people said things they didn't mean. This was not that. This was a man sitting with something uncomfortable and not trying to make it smaller. It didn't fix anything. But it was real. The board wants the framework, she said. Yes. They want to acquire it. Yes. And you. He was quiet for a moment. I want to do whatever you decide is right. That's not a negotiation position. It's just true. Jasmine looked at the envelope on the table. She didn't pick it up. The board's representative arrives Thursday, she said. Thursday morning. She nodded slowly. Then I'll see them Thursday, she said. After I've had time to think. Hyunwoo stood. He bowed his head. Not a performance, just a small, genuine thing. He was at the door when she spoke again. Mr. Choi. He turned. Did you read the framework? She said. All of it. Not the summary. Yes, he said. Then you know it's worth more than whatever they're planning to offer. He held her gaze. I know, he said. He left. Jasmine sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes after he was gone. The envelope sat on the table. She looked at it without touching it. Then Maya appeared in the doorway. Well, she said. He came before the board's people, Jasmine said. Maya leaned against the frame. Why does that matter? Jasmine thought about it. Because it means he's not just trying to fix a business problem, she said. He's trying to fix something else. Maya was quiet for a moment. Is that better or worse? Jasmine didn't answer. She picked up the envelope. If you've ever had to decide whether someone's apology was real enough to matter, you already know the story. Subscribe and stay with us. The board's representative was a man named Director Han. Early 50s, immaculate suit, the kind of practiced warmth that powerful people deploy when they want something and have decided charm is more efficient than force. He arrived Thursday at 10 in the morning with an associate and a leather folder and a prepared offer that his assistant had clearly spent considerable time structuring to sound generous. Jasmine had spent Wednesday night reading Hyunwoo's letter. She read it once, slowly, and then set it on her kitchen table and made tea and sat with it for a long time without reading it again. It was not an eloquent letter. He was not a man who wrote the way he probably spoke in presentations, clean and controlled. The letter was uneven. Some sentences were too long. One paragraph had been crossed out and rewritten in the margin. It said what he had done and traced the line from his father's voice to the board's eyes to the moment in that room when he had chosen wrong. It did not ask her to forgive him. It said only that he understood now what the cost of that moment had been, not just to the company, not just professionally, but to her specifically. As a person, as a woman who had done extraordinary work in a building that hadn't deserved it. It was the crossed-out paragraph that stayed with her. She couldn't read it fully. He had pressed hard enough that the pen had grooved the paper, but the last legible words were, I keep thinking about what it took to walk out of that room the way you did. She folded the letter back into the envelope. Then she called Maya and told her to make sure Thursday's meeting room was ready. Director Han sat across from Jasmine with his leather folder open and his associate taking notes, and he presented the acquisition offer with the smooth efficiency of a man who had done this many times and expected it to work. The number was significant. Jasmine listened without interruption. She let him finish completely. She had learned, from years of being interrupted herself, that there was power in letting someone speak until they were truly done. When he finished, she asked 3 questions. Who would retain intellectual ownership of the Meridian framework after acquisition? What the licensing structure would look like for future applications outside Choi Technology's core business? And what the contractual language said about attribution, specifically whether her name would be attached to the framework in all public and commercial applications. Director Han smiled in the practiced way. Those are details we can work through in the formal negotiation process. Those are not details, Jasmine said. Those are the terms. The smile held. We're offering a very competitive. I heard the number, Jasmine said. I'm asking about the terms. The associate stopped writing. Director Han recalibrated. She could see it, the slight shift in his posture, the reassessment behind his eyes. He had not expected her to move past the number without stopping. The standard acquisition model transfers intellectual property rights to the acquiring entity, he said. That's not unusual in. I know it's not unusual, Jasmine said. That's why I'm not agreeing to it. She closed his folder gently from her side of the table. I'm not selling the Meridian framework, she said. I'm not interested in acquisition. What I'm willing to discuss is a partnership structure. Co-ownership. Caldwell Systems leads the build. Choi Technologies provides infrastructure and capital. Revenue and attribution shared equally, publicly and contractually. Silence. Director Han looked at her with an expression that was trying very hard to remain professional over something that looked very much like surprise. That would be highly irregular, he said carefully. It would be accurate, Jasmine said. I built the framework. Your company didn't. That fact doesn't change because of the number in your folder. He sat back slightly. I'd need to take this back to the board. Of course, she said. She stood. I'll need an answer by end of business Monday. After that, I have other conversations scheduled. She did not specify with whom. She didn't need to. Director Han left with his associate and his leather folder and a phone call already in progress before he reached the car. Maya appeared in the doorway 30 seconds after they left. Other conversations, she said. I have a meeting with a venture capital group next Wednesday, Jasmine said. That part was true. Maya looked at her. And the deadline? Also true, Jasmine said. I'm not waiting past Monday. What neither of them knew was that Director Han's call had gone directly to Hyunwoo. Not the board, not Kwon, but Hyunwoo, and that what he said in that call would send Hyunwoo back to his father's office for the first time since the memo. And that conversation, between a son and the man who built the company, would change everything about what the board was willing to offer. Because Choi Byung-soo, for all his severity, understood one thing above everything else. He recognized when someone had built something real, and he had not become legendary by letting real things walk out the door twice. Hyunwoo had not sat in his father's office voluntarily in over a year. The meetings he attended there were summoned, not chosen. They happened on his father's schedule and on his father's terms, and they usually ended with Hyunwoo driving home in silence, working through the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from labor but from being measured. This time he went without being called. His father was at his desk when Hyunwoo entered. Byung-soo looked up once, assessed the situation with the speed of a man who had been reading rooms for 70 years, and set down his pen. Sit down, he said. Hyunwoo sat. He told his father everything. Not the version he had told the board. The complete version. What Park had shown him, what he had seen on Jasmine's screen that night in the lab, what she had tried to tell him through proper channels 3 times. What he had done in that boardroom. What it had actually been about. His father listened without speaking. That was unusual. Byung-soo was not a man who gave silence easily. When he gave it, it meant he was deciding something important. When Hyunwoo finished, his father was quiet for a moment. You fired her because of Kwon, he said finally. It was not a question. Hyunwoo looked at him. I fired her because I chose the room over the truth. His father studied him. Same thing, he said. He stood and walked to his window. Kwon has been managing my board for 20 years. He is very good at making people believe they are deciding when they are actually being guided. He paused. I should have corrected that years ago. Hyunwoo said nothing. What does she want? His father asked. Partnership. Equal terms. Her name on the framework. Byung-soo turned from the window. And the board objects. They want acquisition. Clean transfer. Her out of the picture. His father made a short sound. Not quite a laugh. They want to take the thing she built and remove the inconvenient fact of who built it. He shook his head. That is not how I built this company. I know, Hyunwoo said. Do you? His father looked at him. The familiar weight of that look, the one Hyunwoo had grown up under. But there was something different in it today. Not the measurement. Something closer to honesty. I built this company because I made things that worked. That was the only credential that mattered. Not where I came from. Not what people assumed about me. He paused. She built something that works. And you dismissed her because of where she was standing in the room. Hyunwoo held his father's gaze. Yes, he said. His father sat back down. He picked up his pen. I'll speak to the board, he said. The partnership terms are acceptable. Hyunwoo stood to leave. Hyun-woo. He turned. His father was looking at the desk, not at him. Bring her to Seoul yourself, he said. Don't send Han again. A pause. Some things require the person who caused the damage to be present for the repair. Hyun-woo flew back to Chicago that evening. He called Jasmine from the airport. She answered on the fourth ring. The board will accept partnership terms, he said. Equal co-ownership. Full attribution. Caldwell Systems leads the build. A silence on her end that he couldn't read. That was fast, she said. My father agreed with your terms. Another silence. I need to hear it directly from the board, she said. In Seoul. In the same room where they watched me walk out. He had expected that. I'll arrange it, he said. And Mr. Choi. Her voice was steady. Always steady. I'm bringing my attorney and my business partner. This isn't a courtesy visit. I know, he said. Then I'll see you in Seoul. She ended the call. Hyun-woo stood in the airport with his phone in his hand and the particular feeling of a man who had spent months inside his own mistake and was finally, carefully, beginning to find the edge of it. What he didn't know was what Jasmine was doing at that exact moment. She was sitting at her kitchen table with his letter in front of her. And she was writing something back. Not a response to the business terms. Something else. Something that had nothing to do with frameworks or boards or attribution clauses. She wrote 2 sentences, stopped, crossed them out. Wrote them again differently. Stopped again. Left it unfinished on the table and went to bed. Some things took longer than a business agreement to become clear. This channel is for women who have learned the hard way that dignity matters. If that sounds like you, I'd love to have you here. Seoul in late spring was different from Seoul in winter. Jasmine noticed it from the car window on the way from the airport. Something looser in the air, less braced. Blossoms on a few late trees. The river catching early morning light. She had been back in the city exactly once since she left it carrying a small box and her dignity. That felt like a different version of herself now, not lesser, just earlier. The woman who had boarded that flight to Chicago with shaking hands and a notebook full of work nobody had seen yet. A lot had happened since then. Maya was beside her in the car, reviewing the partnership agreement terms on her tablet with reading glasses pushed up on her nose, occasionally making small sounds of either approval or suspicion. Their attorney, a sharp Chicago woman named Patricia Ose, who charged accordingly, was in the car behind them. They were not arriving as guests. They were arriving as parties. The Choi Technologies building looked the same from the outside. Of course it did. Buildings didn't record what happened inside them. Jasmine looked at it as the car stopped. You okay? Maya said, not looking up from the tablet. Yes, Jasmine said. You sure? Yes. Maya looked up then, studied her face. Okay, she said, and went back to the tablet. The lobby was different this time. The same 2 security guards at the desk, or ones who looked identical, but they were expecting her now. A senior assistant met them at the entrance. They were taken not to a waiting area but directly to the elevator. 32nd floor. The boardroom. Hyun-woo was already inside when they arrived. He stood when the door opened, not because protocol required it, but because he chose to. Park Sung-jin stood too, from his chair near the window. He caught Jasmine's eye and gave the same small nod from months ago. She returned it. The 8 board members were seated. Director Kwon sat at the far end, expression composed and unreadable. Byung-soo was not present. That had been agreed. His presence would have shifted the power balance in ways that served no one. Hyun-woo stepped away from the head of the table. He gestured toward it. Jasmine walked to it and stood there, in the same room, at the same table, but at the head of it this time, and she felt the difference in her body the way you feel the difference between standing in wind and standing out of it. She set her folder down. Hyun-woo cleared his throat. Before we begin the formal session, he said, I want to address this board directly. He looked at each face, slowly. 8 months ago, in this room, I dismissed a presentation that deserved to be heard. I did so not because the work was flawed. I had reason to believe it was exceptional, but because I prioritized the appearance of order over the substance of what was being said. He paused. That was a failure of leadership. It cost this company, significantly, and it caused harm to someone who came here in good faith. He looked at Jasmine. I owe this board a correction, and I owe Miss Caldwell an apology that no boardroom is large enough to contain. He bowed. Not a slight dip of the head. A full, formal bow, the kind that in Korean culture carries genuine weight and cannot be performed casually without meaning it. The room was completely still. Jasmine looked at him. She had prepared herself for the business of today. She had not fully prepared for this. She let the moment exist without rushing it. Then she opened her folder. "The Meridian Framework," she said. And she began. She presented for 40 minutes. No interruptions. The board that had watched her be removed from this room sat and listened with the focused attention of people who understood, finally and completely, what they were looking at. When she finished, the offers came quickly. Acquisition, full buyout, a senior VP position. Numbers that climbed with each counter. Jasmine let them finish. Then she closed her folder. "I didn't come here to be bought," she said. "I came here to be respected." The room fell still in a different way than it had before. Kwon spoke for the first time. "Miss Caldwell, the numbers we're discussing represent." "I know what the numbers represent," she said. "Here are my terms." She slid the partnership proposal across the table. Patricia Osei placed a copy in front of each board member with the efficient precision of someone who had been in rooms like this many times and was not intimidated by any of them. "Equal co-ownership of the Meridian Framework," Jasmine said. "Caldwell Systems leads development. Choi Technologies provides infrastructure, capital, and distribution reach. Revenue shared 50-50. Attribution contractually permanent. My name on the framework in every application, every license, every public mention. Non-negotiable." Kwon looked at the document, then at Hyunwoo. Hyunwoo looked at Jasmine. "I think," he said quietly, "that is exactly what we deserve." The board signed on a Friday. Not unanimously. Kwon abstained, which was his particular version of protest, and 2 of the older members asked for a weekend to review. By Monday morning, all signatures were present. Patricia Osei sent Jasmine a single text that said, "Done. Call me." And then a second text 2 minutes later that said, "I've never seen a board fold that cleanly. What did you put in that proposal?" Jasmine smiled at her phone. The answer was, nothing unusual. Just terms that were fair, stated clearly by a person who understood their value and did not negotiate against herself. That was rarer than it should have been. The formal partnership launch was set for 6 weeks out, to allow both teams time to prepare the joint announcement. In the meantime, Jasmine and her team began the technical integration work remotely from Chicago, daily calls with Park Sung-jin's engineering team, documentation exchanges, the careful, methodical work of building something real. Park turned out to be exactly what she had always suspected from watching him in that boardroom. A man of genuine technical integrity who was quietly relieved to be working on something honest. 3 months after the signing, the Meridian Framework launched in a joint press release that named both Caldwell Systems and Choi Technologies, with Jasmine Caldwell listed as the framework's architect. The industry response was immediate. 2 major publications ran features. A third called it the most elegant infrastructure solution in a decade. The projected licensing revenue in the first year exceeded even the board's independent valuation. $1.2 billion had been conservative. Jasmine read the coverage at her desk in the Bronzeville hub on a Tuesday morning, drinking coffee, with Maya sitting across from her doing the same. "There it is," Maya said. "There it is," Jasmine agreed. What she didn't say, what she was still working out how to say, was that the success of the framework was only part of what she was thinking about that morning. The other part was a voicemail she had listened to 3 times before leaving her apartment. Hyunwoo had called at 6 in the morning, which meant it was 8 in the evening in Seoul, and left a message that was not about the launch coverage or the partnership metrics. It was brief. His voice had that particular careful quality of someone saying something they've rehearsed but still aren't sure about. "I finished reading your letter," he said. "The one you left unfinished. I know you didn't send it. I found it because you left it in the shared document folder by mistake. I should have told you immediately. I'm sorry for not doing that. But I want you to know what you wrote in those 2 sentences. A pause. I think about them." She had not realized she'd uploaded it. She sat with that for most of the morning. It was Maya who finally said what was obvious. "You need to deal with that," she said, without looking up from her screen. "I know," Jasmine said. "Not the business part. The other part. I know, Maya. Because if you don't. Maya. I'm just saying. Jasmine picked up her phone. She didn't call him. She wasn't ready for a call. She opened her message thread with him, mostly logistics, framework timelines, integration notes, and scrolled to the top. The first message from him was from 8 months ago. 3 words. Safe flight home. She had never responded to it. At the time, it had felt like an intrusion. A man who had just fired her sending pleasantries. Looking at it now, from here, it felt different. She put her phone face down on the desk. 2 weeks later, Hyunwoo came to Chicago for the first joint team review meeting. This was scheduled, professional, necessary. What was not scheduled was the dinner afterward, just the two of them. No teams, no attorneys, no agenda. Maya had engineered it with impressive subtlety, claiming a conflict and suggesting Jasmine take the client dinner in her place. Jasmine had let her. They sat in a small West African restaurant on the south side that Jasmine had been going to since graduate school. Warm light, good jollof rice, the kind of place that didn't know or care who Hyunwoo Choi was. He looked at the menu with genuine concentration. "What should I order?" he asked. "What do you like?" "I don't know yet," he said. "I've never had this food." She ordered for both of them. When the food came, he ate carefully, paying attention. The way he seemed to pay attention to most things, she had noticed. Not politely. Actually. "It's good," he said. "I know," she said. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the framework. Not about the partnership. About his father, and what that conversation had actually cost him to have. About her mother, and the recipe she still made when she needed to think. About what it felt like to be certain you were right and still lose the room. At some point the restaurant had mostly emptied around them, and neither of them had noticed. "The 2 sentences," he said finally, quietly. "In the letter you didn't send." Jasmine looked at him. "You don't have to explain them," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I read them. And I understood them." She held his gaze. "Then you understand," she said, "that they come with conditions." "I know," he said. "Not small ones." "I know," he said again. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in late summer, warm and loud and entirely itself, unbothered by the weight of what 2 people were beginning to say to each other at a corner table in a small restaurant that smelled like palm oil and home. If you've ever had to decide whether someone had truly changed or just gotten better at apologizing, you already understand this moment. Subscribe. These are the stories we tell here. 2 years after the Meridian Framework launched, Jasmine Caldwell was running late. This was unusual. She was not a woman who ran late, but the interview had gone long. A 40-minute conversation with a journalist from a technology publication that had, somewhere around the 30-minute mark, turned into something more honest than either of them had planned. The journalist had asked, "What do you want people to understand about how this came to exist?" Jasmine had thought about it for a moment. That it almost didn't, she said. The cab moved through Seoul's early evening traffic. The city had become familiar to her in a way she hadn't fully anticipated, not home but known. She had been here 6 times in 2 years. She knew which side streets to take from Mapo to Gangnam. She knew the particular quality of spring light over the Han River. She knew the coffee shop near the Choi Technologies building where Park Sung-jin liked to work on Friday afternoons. She knew, now, the difference between the bow Hyunwoo gave at board meetings and the way he held a door. Caldwell Systems had offices on 2 continents, 18 employees in Chicago, 7 in Seoul. The Meridian Framework was licensed to 11 enterprise clients across 4 industries. The revenue had long since passed what any conservative projection had suggested. But Jasmine measured the company differently than by revenue. She measured it by what it meant that her name was on the framework. Permanently, contractually, in every application, every press release, every industry mention. Not as a courtesy, as a fact. She measured it by the email she had received 3 months ago from a 26-year-old systems engineer in Atlanta, a black woman, first-generation college graduate, about to accept an internship at a large technology company, who had written, "I read about the Meridian Framework and about you. I wanted you to know that I'm going in differently because of it." Jasmine had read that email twice, then printed it and put it in the back of her notebook, where she kept things she needed but didn't want to look at too often. The cab stopped outside a restaurant in Itaewon. Hyunwoo was already there. He stood when she came in. He always did now, not from formality but from something that had become simply his habit with her. He had her tea ordered and waiting. He had learned, somewhere in the last 2 years, exactly how she took it. She sat down. "The interview went long," she said. "I heard. Park texted me." A pause. "He said you made the journalist cry." "The journalist made himself cry," she said. "I just answer the question." Hyunwoo smiled. Small and genuine. The same smile she had seen for the first time across a table in Chicago in a restaurant that smelled like palm oil and home. They had not made it simple. She had not made it simple, because simple was not what it deserved to be. There had been months of careful distance after Chicago, months of professional precision, while they both determined whether what was growing between them was real or just the particular intimacy of people who had been through something significant together. It was real. She had made him prove it. Not cruelly. She wasn't interested in punishment, but honestly, because she was 36 years old, and she had learned the difference between a man who apologized and a man who changed, and she had decided, a long time ago, that she would only accept the second kind. He had accepted her conditions without negotiating them. That had mattered. There were still difficult things. His father remained complicated, not hostile, but a man formed by a world that took time to adjust to new facts. They were working on it. Slowly, in the way of people who respect that some distances close at their own pace. There was the way certain rooms still changed temperature when she walked in. In Seoul, in Chicago, in the industry spaces where her presence was still considered remarkable rather than simply expected. She had stopped spending energy on that and redirected it toward the next generation of women who would walk into those rooms after her, for whom remarkable might finally become ordinary. Hyunwoo reached across the table. Not dramatic, not a performance, just his hand placed near hers, the way it did now, an invitation, not a claim. She looked at his hand. She thought about the boardroom, the folder hitting the table, walking out with a notebook full of work nobody had seen yet, the cold Seoul Street, and the cafe around the corner, and the tea she had ordered with shaking hands. She thought about the version of herself who had sat in that cafe and asked, quietly and honestly, was it ever going to be different? She covered his hand with hers. Outside, Seoul moved through its evening, the particular noise and light of a city that did not slow down for anyone, that did not know or care about the two people sitting in a window seat making a quiet decision about the rest of their lives. Some things didn't require an audience. Some things were just true and quiet and earned. The real lesson was never really about the framework. It was never really about the $1 billion, or the boardroom, or even the apology. It was about a woman who did extraordinary work in a building that didn't expect her, who walked out with her dignity intact when everything else was taken, who built something the world was not ready for, and then waited, patiently and without apology, for the world to catch up. Respect cannot be demanded. Dignity cannot be purchased. And some women don't raise their voices. They simply stand firm, until the world learns, finally, completely, and without any further confusion, to listen. Because somewhere tonight, another woman is working quietly in a room that has underestimated her. She is building something, and it is coming. If you've ever had to build your future in the dark, trusting nothing but your own hands, this channel was made for you.
Thank you for watching Afro Korean Storytime. As we come to the end of this story, I want to share something with the women watching. Many of you have faced moments like this. Moments when you had to stand on your own. Moments when you chose dignity instead of the easier path. Moments when you refused to be silenced, controlled, or pushed aside. That kind of strength is often quiet, but it has the power to change the entire room. If you are a woman who believes respect is more valuable than money, if you believe character still matters, if you believe dignity should never be something you compromise, then this channel was created with you in mind. Here, I tell stories about women who stand their ground, women who earn respect without asking for it, women who remind even the most powerful people that integrity cannot be bought. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. And if this story meant something to you, write the word dignity in the comments below. I read your comments, and they help these stories reach more women who need to hear them. Until our next story, remember, Not every powerful person chooses honor, but every strong woman carries it within herself. I'll see you in the next one.